When 50,000 women were killed on live broadcast, a human diplomat stood for justice. The entire galaxy froze in a moment of horrified disbelief. It wasn't a war. It wasn't an accident. It was the deliberate, cold execution of 50,000 women, broadcasted live for all to witness. The screen flickered to life, the faces of the doomed women etched with confusion, fear, and defiance. They were the last members of a peaceful civilization whose only crime was standing in the way of the Galactic Council's new order. The women leaders and activists had long campaigned for an end to the Council's oppressive policies. They had defied the status quo, and the price for their bravery was unimaginable. The execution was not only brutal but calculated. A slow, methodical slaughter, broadcasted across every channel and social media network in the galaxy, so no one could plead ignorance. As the camera zoomed in, showing terrified faces, a voice, calm, detached, even cruel, explained the reasoning. This is the price of dissent. The Council has spoken. May the galaxy take heed. Ambassador Elios Denner watched the broadcast in the silence of his office, his hands gripping the edges of the desk, his knuckles white. The anger simmering beneath his composed exterior was dangerous. He had been a diplomat for years, negotiating peace treaties, balancing intergalactic trade agreements, and smoothing over the tensions between species that had once thought war was their only solution. But this was something else entirely. A cold, unfeeling massacre that defied every principle of justice he had ever stood for. Elios had been briefed on the events leading to this point. A rebel group on a distant world had managed to cause a stir, enough of a stir to draw the ire of the Galactic Council. When their protests turned violent, the Council, in its infinite wisdom, declared an iron-fisted solution. They wiped out the rebels' leaders, their families, and anyone connected to them. And this broadcast was meant to be a warning to anyone else who dared to oppose them. But Elios wasn't someone who could be so easily silenced. He pushed himself away from the desk, eyes narrowing as he turned to the large window overlooking the star systems beyond. The vastness of space, the infinite potential, had always inspired him. Until now. Now it felt like a cage, a prison for those too weak to stand up for what was right. The galaxy was fracturing, and the Council had shown exactly how far they were willing to go to maintain their control. This act was a declaration of war on freedom itself. He couldn't stay silent, not when entire civilizations were being crushed underfoot. Elios had always known the Council was corrupt. They were politicians, after all, and politicians thrived on control, manipulation, and deceit. But this was beyond political games. This was mass murder, a public execution meant to send a message to the galaxy. Comply or die. His fingers brushed over the communicator on his desk. He could feel the weight of his decision before he even made it. This wasn't going to be easy. He'd known the stakes of diplomacy his entire life. One wrong word, one miscalculation, and everything could fall apart. But this wasn't just a matter of political survival. This was about something deeper. Justice. The flickering light of the screen before him showed the aftermath of the broadcast. Survivors, the families of those slaughtered, and the galaxy, left in stunned silence. Some would applaud the Council's brutal show of force. Others would despair, wondering what kind of galaxy they were living in. But Elios knew what he had to do. He took a deep breath and activated the comm system. The face that appeared on the screen was familiar, an old friend, a fellow diplomat, who had once shared Elios's optimism about the galaxy's potential for peace. But today, there was no time for optimism. Elios, the voice on the other end, asked, sensing the gravity of the moment. What's going on? The broadcast, it's all anyone's talking about. Elios's gaze hardened. It's worse than we thought, he replied, his voice steady. But beneath it, there was an undeniable fury. The Council's actions were deliberate. They killed those women to make a point. And that point is clear. They'll stop at nothing to maintain control. We have to stop them. A heavy silence hung in the air before his friend spoke again. What are you planning? I'm going to the Council, and I'm going to expose them for what they truly are. The galaxy deserves to know what happened, and I will make sure they do. With that, the call ended. Helios turned away from the screen, his mind already racing ahead. The road to justice would be a difficult one, fraught with danger and opposition from forces far beyond his control. But there was no other option. He would stand for what was right, even if it meant facing the wrath of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. The galaxy's fate rested on his next move, and Helios Denner wasn't about to back down. The walls of the Galactic Council's chambers were made of polished obsidian, a material so dark that it seemed to swallow light whole. Inside, the leaders of the galaxy's most powerful species sat in their grand seats of authority, each one poised, unreadable, and distanced from the suffering of those below. The hum of whispered conversations filled the air, but there was one thing they all had in common. None of them would dare address what had happened on that broadcast. Helios Denner stood before them, his back straight, his face betraying none of the turmoil swirling inside him. He had come to the council with a mission, one that no one, least of all the council members, would likely welcome. The massacre of 50,000 women was more than a political maneuver. It was a calculated act of power, a move that sent ripples through every corner of the galaxy. The council had made a statement, and Helios was here to prove that their so-called necessary actions were nothing more than murder dressed in the guise of order. "I stand here not only as an ambassador for humanity," Helios began, his voice calm but carrying a weight that silenced the room, "but as a representative of all who still believe in justice. What we witnessed, what you allowed to happen, was nothing short of barbarism, a deliberate act of terror, an act that must not go unchallenged." He let the words hang in the air, a tension filling the space between him and the faces staring down at him. Most of them were unmoved, their expressions unreadable, as if his words had already been calculated, already dismissed. But one figure, an older alien with deep purple skin and eyes like burning embers, shifted uncomfortably in their seat. This was Counselor Zykus, a member with a reputation for being ruthlessly pragmatic. His discomfort was fleeting but significant. "The rebellion had to be dealt with swiftly, Ambassador," Zykus said, his tone sharp and dismissive. "The women you speak of were not innocent. They were leaders of insurgents, and their deaths were a necessary step in preventing chaos from spreading." Helios's heart clenched, but he didn't show it. Instead, he stood taller, unflinching. And the children? The families? The innocents slaughtered alongside them? Was that necessary too? A murmur rippled through the room, but the counselors remained silent. Helios could feel the shift, however small it was. They were beginning to realize that this wasn't just an accusation, it was an investigation, one that they weren't prepared to face. Helios had spent hours digging into the official reports, uncovering the carefully constructed lies that had justified the massacre. The narrative painted the women as terrorists, as enemies of the galaxy's peace, but the truth was much darker. He had found traces of bribery and corruption, hints of illegal arms deals, and the involvement of several high-ranking council members who had secretly funded the rebel faction's rise, only to later use it as an excuse to eliminate them. The rebellion hadn't been the problem. The problem was power, maintaining it, consolidating it, and making sure no one threatened the monopoly the council had built over centuries. But now, it was time to make that truth known. "I've seen the classified files," Helios continued, his eyes narrowing. "The ones that are buried in the archives, hidden from public view. I know about the backroom deals, the alliances formed in shadows. And I know that the massacre of those women wasn't just about quelling rebellion. It was about silencing opposition. It was about sending a message that says, if you stand against us, you will pay." The room fell deathly silent. Every eye in the chamber was now on him. Helios could feel their gaze, calculating, cold, but also tinged with something else, fear. They knew he had the truth, and they knew that truth, once revealed, would unravel the fragile structure they had built. But they wouldn't give in so easily. Counselor Zykus leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You have no proof of this, Ambassador. No one will believe your claims without solid evidence. You're nothing but a lone voice in the dark." Helios didn't hesitate. He activated a small device on the table in front of him, and a holographic screen flickered to life above the table. The recordings were raw, unedited footage from the day of the massacre, images of the women, their final moments, and the haunting faces of the children who had been caught in the crossfire. He didn't need to speak. The images spoke for themselves. As the footage played, the council members shifted in their seats. Zychus's face remained stoic, but even he couldn't fully hide the flicker of discomfort in his eyes. Ilios was taking the first step, the hardest step, the one that would either lead to his downfall or the exposure of a dark truth that had been carefully buried for far too long. "The galaxy deserves to know," Ilios said, his voice calm yet resolute. "And if you continue to stand by this lie, I will make sure they do." A deep silence followed. Ilios knew the battle was far from over. He had just opened a door that, once fully pried open, would change everything. But even as the council stared back at him with a mix of fury and fear, one thing was certain. Ilios Denner would not back down. The truth had been revealed. Now it was time for the galaxy to choose its side. The weight of the galaxy pressed down on Ilios Denner's shoulders, and with every passing moment, the walls around him seemed to close in. But he stood taller than ever before, his resolve unshakable. The evidence was out. The truth had been broadcast across the galaxy, and there was no going back now. The council had shown its hand, and Ilios had answered with a defiant cry for justice. The response was swift and ruthless. Within hours, factions loyal to the council had mobilized, condemning Ilios's accusations as lies and fabrications. The media outlets controlled by the council blasted his name across every screen, labeling him a traitor, a destabilizing force. They called for his immediate arrest, and their propaganda machine churned out carefully crafted stories that painted him as a danger to galactic peace. But Ilios had expected this. In fact, he had planned for it. "I know the consequences," Ilios muttered to himself as he stared out the window of his private quarters, watching the lights of distant stars flicker like scattered jewels across the void. But there's no turning back now. His communicator beeped. It was a secure channel, the kind only the most trusted diplomats used. Ilios tapped the screen and watched as his colleague, Senator Teria of the Villani people, appeared. Her face was drawn, her eyes weary, but there was an edge of urgency in her tone. "Ambassador," Teria began, "the council has just called for an emergency session. They've accused you of inciting rebellion. This could go far beyond the political realm. They're talking about charges of treason." Ilios's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "I know, but I can't stay silent. What happened on that broadcast wasn't just an isolated tragedy. It was a warning to all of us, and I won't allow it to be swept under the rug." Teria's gaze hardened, a flicker of something like respect in her eyes. "I agree, but you need to be careful. The council doesn't just control the media. They have the military, the covert operatives. You're playing a dangerous game." "I've already made my move," Ilios replied, his tone firm. "I will speak at the session. I'll expose them all." There was a long pause as Teria processed his words. Finally, she spoke again, softer this time. "I'll help you," she said. "I'll ensure your voice is heard. But you'll need allies, and you'll need to move fast. The council has eyes everywhere." Ilios nodded, even though he knew she couldn't see the gesture. He wasn't alone. Humanity wasn't just a political power in this galaxy. It was a force to be reckoned with. And now they would show the galaxy just how far they were willing to go to defend what was right. The next day, Ilios made his way to the council's main assembly hall, flanked by a small but loyal group of human special forces. They were his protection, but more than that, they were a symbol, a reminder that humanity had never been weak and never would be again. As Ilios entered the vast hall, a cold silence swept over the room. The leaders of countless alien races stared down at him from their elevated seats, their faces unreadable masks of power. Ilios stood in the center under the harsh light of the council's gaze, and for a moment he was reminded of how small he truly was in this vast, sprawling galaxy. But then he remembered what he was here for, the truth. And the truth had a way of cutting through the darkest corners of the universe. "Council," Ilios began, his voice steady, though the weight of the moment bore down on him. What happened on that broadcast was not just a tragedy. It was murder. 50,000 innocent lives lost. And you, the governing body of this galaxy, allowed it to happen. You allowed it to be televised. A murmur of outrage rippled through the room. Zykus, the counselor who had spoken so coldly to Ilios before, stood and raised a hand, silencing the crowd. You've said your piece, Ambassador, but you offer no proof beyond your own accusations. Ilios's gaze hardened. He wasn't just here to speak. He was here to force them to face the consequences of their actions. I've shown the proof. The evidence is undeniable. The galaxy deserves to know the truth. For a moment, there was only silence, and then something unexpected, a shift. Some counselors exchanged glances, while others remained silent, perhaps unsure of how to proceed. The truth was out there, and for the first time, Ilios could see a crack in the unshakable facade of the council. Zykus's voice cut through the tension. You will be removed from this assembly if you continue to spread lies. Do you understand? Ilios held his ground. You can silence me, but you can't silence the truth. Not anymore. Ilios Denner had just made his stand, and there was no turning back. Ilios Denner's mind raced as he left the council chambers, the weight of his defiance heavier than ever. The stakes had escalated quickly. He had stood against the most powerful political body in the galaxy, and now the council had declared him an enemy. They had silenced him for the moment, but the seed had been planted. The galaxy was watching, and the truth was spreading faster than he anticipated. But the road ahead would not be an easy one. As he made his way back to his quarters, his thoughts turned to the next move. Alone, he was nothing. Alone, he was vulnerable. He needed allies, and he needed them fast. Before he could settle into his thoughts, his communicator chimed again. It was a secure line, and when Ilios answered, the face that appeared wasn't one he had expected. It was a face from his past, a former military commander, General Freynek of the Galvassians. Freynek had been one of the most feared tacticians in the galaxy, a master of warfare whose name was whispered with respect by even the most powerful species. He had once served as an ally to the Council, but over the years, his loyalty had faded as he saw the Council's true nature. Ilios had met him years ago during a negotiation, and though their paths had diverged, the respect they shared had never wavered. Ambassador, Freynek said, his deep voice gravelly. I'm not the kind of person to get involved in politics, but the events you're speaking of, they can't go ignored. I have my resources. I can help you. Ilios raised an eyebrow. Help me? You've been keeping your distance from the Council for years, Freynek. Why now? The Galvassian's face remained stoic, but there was an unmistakable fire behind his eyes. Because, Ambassador, the Council's actions have crossed a line. I've seen the devastation they've caused, and I've seen what they'll do to keep their power. If they're allowed to continue, there won't be a galaxy left to govern. Ilios hesitated for a moment, his mind processing the offer. He had always known the Council's hold over the galaxy was tenuous, fragile at best. The Council had always relied on fear and manipulation to maintain order. But they had pushed too far this time. Freynek wasn't the only one who had seen it. Ilios knew that if he could gather the right people, there was a chance, a real chance, to expose the Council for what it truly was. You're right, Ilios finally said. But it won't be enough just to expose them. We need more. We need the support of the galaxy's factions, those who have the strength to challenge the Council. Freynek nodded. And I know just where to start. Later that evening, Ilios found himself aboard a stealth ship, hidden from the prying eyes of the Council's surveillance network. Freynek had arranged a meeting with a group of allies, disparate, underground factions that had long resisted the Council's tyranny. Each one had a different reason for opposing the Council, but all of them shared one goal: freedom. As the ship descended into the darkened hangar of a hidden base on a remote world, Ilios couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision he had made. These weren't allies he could trust without question. Many of them were exiles, rebels, and mercenaries, each with their own agenda. Some of them had histories of violence and betrayal. But in this moment, Ilios had no choice but to rely on them. The ship landed with a soft thud, and the hatch opened. Ilios stepped out, flanked by Hrenek and his security detail. As he made his way across the hangar, a figure stepped forward, tall, imposing, and cloaked in shadows. "Ambassador Denner," the figure said, voice low and gravelly. "I trust you understand what you're asking of us." Ilios didn't hesitate. "I understand the risks, but the Council's actions have put the galaxy on a path to destruction. We need your help. If we expose them, we have a chance to bring true justice to the galaxy." The figure tilted his head, considering Ilios's words. "Justice, you say? Tell me, Ambassador, how many innocent lives are you willing to sacrifice to achieve this justice?" Ilios's pulse quickened. "I'm not here to sacrifice anyone. I'm here to stop more lives from being lost, to stop the Council's tyranny once and for all." The figure's eyes narrowed. "We'll see." Ilios forced himself to stay calm, but the tension in the air was palpable. The figure before him was none other than Karin, leader of the Black Syndicate, a group of ruthless mercenaries who had long fought against the Council's influence in the galactic underworld. They were dangerous, unpredictable, but their reach was vast. If he could secure their support, they could make a significant impact. "We'll need a lot more than words, Ambassador," Karin continued, stepping closer. "You want our help, you need to prove you can get results. If you fail, don't expect our loyalty." Ilios nodded. "Understood. We'll begin by dismantling the Council's financial network. We'll hit them where it hurts, their resources. We do that, and the galaxy will take notice." Karin gave a sharp nod, his expression unreadable. "Very well. We'll assist, but know this, we expect something in return. Don't forget the price of our help." Ilios looked him squarely in the eye. "I don't forget anything. But right now, the price of inaction is far greater than anything we'll pay." As they left the hangar to discuss their next steps, Ilios couldn't shake the feeling that he had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But he also knew that this was the only way forward. The pieces were falling into place, and now it was up to him to ensure they fit together. The Council was powerful, but it was not invincible. The galaxy was on the brink of change, and Ilios was at the center of it. The question wasn't whether they could succeed, it was whether they would survive long enough to see it through. The first shot was fired in the shadows. Ilios Denner sat in the dimly lit room, his hands clenched on the edge of the table. The intelligence report had just arrived, and the information it contained sent a cold shiver down his spine. The Council, in response to his growing movement, had escalated their retaliation. The peace he had once worked for had shattered, and now the galaxy was on the precipice of something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The Council had launched a surprise attack on one of their own allies, a peaceful agricultural world called Turavan. The world was known for its neutral stance, its dedication to preserving life, and its refusal to align with the Council's military expansion. In a single brutal strike, the Council decimated their cities, obliterated their defense systems, and sent the message loud and clear: fall in line, or face the same fate. Ilios's eyes narrowed as he read the details of the attack. The Council's military, led by an elite division of fleet commanders, had unleashed a devastating orbital bombardment that left nothing but rubble behind. Turavan's cries for help went unanswered, their pleas drowned out by the Council's overwhelming power. This wasn't a warning. It was a declaration of war. "They're pushing us toward all-out conflict," Ilios muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. His hands trembled slightly as he set the report down, the weight of the galaxy's future pressing on his shoulders. The movement he had started to expose the truth was no longer a diplomatic mission. It was the spark that could ignite a galaxy-wide inferno. The room door slid open, and Hrenek entered, his face grim. The general didn't need to speak. His presence was enough to convey the gravity of the situation. "I've seen the report," he said, his voice low but steady. "The Council has gone too far. If we don't act quickly, the war will consume us all." Ilios nodded. "We can't let them get away with this. We have to rally the factions, expose the full extent of their corruption, and show the galaxy the truth. If we let them wipe out one world to maintain their control, they'll keep going until there's nothing left." Freyneck crossed the room and stood beside Ilios, staring at the map of the galaxy projected in front of them. The lines of alliance, the strategic choke points, the military installations. The Council's grip had spread everywhere, touching every corner of the galaxy. But there were cracks now, cracks that Ilios intended to exploit. "We need to hit them where it hurts," Freyneck said, tapping a specific location on the map. "Their supply lines, their military infrastructure. If we cripple their ability to maintain this war, we can give the galaxy a chance to fight back." Ilios's mind raced. He had always known that the path to justice was fraught with peril, but this was something else entirely. A full-scale war, one that would tear apart everything he had ever worked for. But as the memories of Turavan's destruction played in his mind, the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. There was no other way. "We'll need the Syndicate," Ilios said firmly. "Karin and his people can help us sabotage their supply routes. But we can't do this alone. We need every faction we can get." Freyneck raised an eyebrow. "You think the rebels will join us? Or the neutral systems?" Ilios exhaled slowly. "They will. The truth is out now. The Council's power is built on fear and manipulation. If we can expose their weakness, we can turn the galaxy against them. The question is whether they'll wait until we act, or if they'll strike first." As if on cue, a transmission alert flashed on the holographic screen before them. Ilios's stomach twisted as he saw the source, the Black Syndicate. He activated the message, and Karin's face appeared. "Ambassador," Karin said, his voice cold, "the Council has initiated a full lockdown on our operations. They're coming for us. We need to act now, or they'll wipe us out before we can even make a move." Ilios felt the walls closing in. The war had already begun. "We'll move forward as planned," he said, his voice firm. "Hit them hard. Disrupt their supply chains. We need to send a message. This ends now." Karin's eyes glinted with the promise of violence. "Understood. We'll make it painful." The line cut off, leaving Ilios standing in the tense silence. It was happening. The pieces were in motion. He had no idea if they would succeed, but one thing was certain. The Council's reign of terror was coming to an end. It was time to fight back. And as Ilios looked at the map, he saw a path forward. A path that would lead to a galaxy at war. But in the end, it would be a war worth fighting. The fate of the galaxy was now in his hands. The galaxy had changed overnight. The once proud Zorketh Empire, which had ruled vast sectors of space with unmatched power, was now nothing more than a memory. In its place, something far more unsettling was emerging. The humans had claimed their victory, but it wasn't just a battle they had won. It was an entire shift in the galactic balance. Captain Alice Trevors stood on the bridge of the human flagship, watching as the final remnants of the Zorketh fleet were scattered across the void, their once mighty ships reduced to floating wreckage. Her gaze was cold, calculating. The war was over, but the real work was only beginning. The humans weren't just here to conquer. They were here to reshape the galaxy. "Captain," a voice interrupted her thoughts. Lieutenant Ree stood beside her, a holographic map of the galaxy projected before them. "We've received confirmation. All major Zorketh strongholds have been taken. The Council members are already preparing to surrender." Alice nodded, her expression unreadable. "Good. But don't get comfortable. This isn't just about taking worlds. It's about the future." She could feel the weight of her words. The humans had made their mark on the galaxy, and now it was time to turn the tide, to forge a new order. No more complacency. No more outdated empires. The galaxy would be shaped by a new force, one that understood survival and strength like no other. "We'll begin with the Council members," Alice continued. "They're the key to the entire structure of this galaxy. Once we have them in place, we can start rebuilding." The bridge fell silent as the officers began their work, coordinating the next phase of their campaign. Alice watched the vastness of space outside the viewport, the stars seemingly indifferent to the destruction below. But she knew the truth. This was only the beginning. The galaxy was waking up to a new reality. The Galactic Council had once been an unshakable institution, a symbol of unity across the stars. They had believed their power was inviolable, their reign absolute. But now, as they scrambled to secure the last of their territories, they realized just how wrong they had been. Counselor Trivac, the last surviving leader of the Zorketh, paced nervously in his chamber, the harsh lights casting long shadows across the walls. His once mighty species had been humbled, and with them, the entire council. "I told you," Trivac muttered bitterly to himself, his mind racing. "I told you we should have taken them seriously." But the humans were relentless. They had obliterated every defense the Zorketh had put in place, dismantled the council's hold on the galaxy, and now they were demanding submission. Trivac had no choice but to comply. The humans had shown no mercy, and his people had been reduced to a shell of their former selves. The communication console on his desk buzzed to life, and Trivac froze, his heart pounding. He knew what was coming. "Counselor Trivac." Alice's voice came through the screen, crisp and authoritative. "It's time to talk." Trivac swallowed hard. He had no illusions about the outcome of this meeting. The humans had already won. There was no negotiation, no bargaining. They had come to take control, and nothing would stop them. "We are ready to listen, Captain Travers," Trivac said, his voice tight, unwilling to show the extent of his fear. "What is it you want?" "The galaxy," Alice replied simply. "The old order is gone. The council has failed. And now, we're here to make sure it never rises again." Trivac's face twisted with anger, but he forced himself to remain calm. "You think you can replace us? You think you can control everything? You're just a species of scavengers." Alice didn't flinch. "We've already done it, and we'll continue to do it. This isn't about dominance for the sake of power, Trivac. It's about survival. And in this galaxy, only those who understand that can rule. The rest will be swept aside." She paused, letting her words hang in the air, a cold promise of what was to come. "You may be the last of your kind, Trivac. The Zorketh may be a story for the history books. But humanity? We will rebuild the galaxy. We will unite the survivors. We will forge alliances with those who want to live. And we will ensure that peace is maintained on our terms." Trivac's lips curled into a grimace. "And what of those who oppose you?" "They'll be dealt with," Alice said, her tone chillingly calm. "Those who fight against us will join the Zorketh in the void." As the transmission ended, Trivac sank into his chair, his mind spinning. The humans had already won. There was no going back. Alice stood in the war room, her officers gathered around the table. The holographic map of the galaxy flickered with new data as more and more systems fell under their control. The work was far from over, but the foundation was set. The humans had proven themselves as hunters, and now they were going to show the galaxy what it meant to be the dominant force. "We'll need to consolidate our power quickly," Alice said, addressing the officers. "The Zorketh are gone, but there are still remnants of the old empire out there. It's time to send a message." A lieutenant nodded. "What's the first step, Captain?" Alice's eyes hardened. "We start by taking the strongest of the old alliances. We offer peace to those who'll accept it. Those who resist will face the same fate as the Zorketh." The galaxy was theirs now, and Alice knew one thing above all else. Humanity would not stop hunting until every last obstacle had been removed. The galaxy would be remade. Under humanity's rule, there would be no more complacency, no more empires that believed they were untouchable. The new order had arrived, and it would never be the same again.